So I'm going to start straight off with the problem we face. And the problem we face, I thank Vantage Partners for having done a beautiful survey, which I think was distributed early last year, about the causes of alliance failure. What you see is that the causes of alliance failure, aside from external factors, which are out of our control, have to do with challenges during execution, with deal terms that were flawed, or that partners weren't matched right, or the partnering itself was strategically the wrong choice. This is sort of the broad picture of what we get from that survey. Here is, I think, the problem for today, what I would like to address today. It is that half the alliances fail because of faults in deal strategy. I know that sometimes we think it's all about the alliance management and what we here do at ASAP, but to some extent, it is the way the deal was set up. Either that partnering was not the right choice, or that the partner selection was wrong, or that the deal terms were flawed. What we might call deal strategy is as important as, in a way, the alliance management during execution. So I'd like to focus on not just the red parts here, but especially the integration between the blue and the red, between what we do as alliance managers and what, to some extent, is done outside of the alliance management group by business development, finance, and legal people. And in fact, the worst problem is not just that these two things are causes of failure, but it is that they are often done separately. And the orange and red boxes here are sometimes done by business development, legal, finance folks. The blue part is done by alliance manager, and of course the external part is the gray part. But it's that separation amongst the disciplines that is a problem. So what we're going to do is I'll give you a little strategic roadmap. I think this is partly what's needed in order to design alliances for success. That's our purpose, for success over their lifetime, you might say. We need concepts and language so that we can all understand each other inside a company and across partners. We need some tools. The book has a bunch of them. I'm going to show you one of them here, or a couple of them maybe. And then we need an integrated organizational process, and I'll show you an example here from a company with which I worked that can help you understand how we can integrate these various disciplines. That these may be simple rules, but they're very powerful, and every time I see a combination, at least one of them is violated and not taken care of. So this should remind you of how to play the game. Let's see how they play out. It turns out that different people are involved in different parts of this triangle. And I call this the three languages of partnerships. Basically, the folks doing the 1 and 1 is 3 are somehow business development, finance, maybe marketing, sales, etc. And they're the ones most concerned about that. 1 and 1 is 1, the governance part. Well, I'm putting the ASAP logo there because I think that is definitely where ASAP is centered. And then the sharing of the value, well, what you see there is a little bit of a back of a napkin sort of exchange of value that lawyers might actually be writing down. And it strikes me that this legal concept of sharing value and risk is very intimately tied to how we think about the creation of a governance structure that works, and then ultimately both of these are intimately tied to how do we create value in terms of business development and returns. Yet we often think about them separately, we specialize separately, and in our companies we have different divisions that work on different parts. Think about the organizational process that you have in place in order to make this happen. These three constituencies did not mix often, and I find that in practice when I work with companies, it takes an extra effort to bring into the same workshop, for example, folks from all of these different disciplines. When we do that, it's extremely powerful. It's extremely useful, eyes open up, and I think new collaboration gets created that is very effective. So let me give you an example of that works. Before we go to the example, in concept, in theory, if you will, how do you coordinate these decisions better? Again, it goes back to the 3 laws. That's why it's a roadmap. You're going to think about each one of these 3. And typically, there are different units who are responsible for each one of these, as I mentioned already. There may be different strategies that are, in a way, complementary and relate to this law, and different decision criteria, and basically different disciplines, different functions. Alliance management, as we have in ASAP, is a profession, is a discipline, and so is business development, and so is finance, and so is law, etc. So when you roll this out, There's too much here for me to go through in this webinar, but again, there's more in the book, and you can study this. There's another starred slide. Basically, business development works very strongly on the question of identifying joint value. And they have goals, positions, and they use the economics of the business and forecasts in order to do that. Governing the collaboration is partly the job, I think, of legal as well as alliance management, very importantly alliance management. And there we have, you know, different government policies, relationship management rules, and as I said already, a discipline, a profession that focuses on that blue part rather than on the green part. And finally, the orange part, it's how do we share the value? And this is where finance is super interested in knowing the value of the alliance, and legal too, because this is a matter of sharing risk and sharing liability and things like that. And so, again, alliance management, you know, may or may not be deeply involved in the green and the orange, but I submit to you that it is super important that we integrate these three functions and these three ways of thinking together. So how do we do that? I'll show you one case. It's a company that I won't name, but it's a large company, global company, involved in a lot of alliances as well as a lot of acquisitions, a lot of deal making, let's put it that way, with a very large business development, alliance management, and legal group, very well staffed in terms of those disciplines. Even so, their traditional mode of attacking business combinations was to pass the baton. And essentially, you had business development going out, being the one searching for something, pretty much running the management of it, bringing in a lawyer, maybe a due diligence team. And then when we get to launch and management, it's when alliance management becomes important and starts being you know, involved. But even the lawyers seem to change from the negotiating lawyer to the launch lawyer to the management lawyer. And as you can see, there's a lot of churn here. And there's a lot of reinventing the wheel every time we move from one stage to the next. And this is just the beginning stage of an alliance. It doesn't even talk about how do you renegotiate and adjust, which will happen also. And clearly this is a syndrome that many of us have. I've seen this over and over again, and we kind of recognize it. We don't always have a solution to it. In this particular case, this company developed a very well-integrated deal-to-alliance approach. A team-based approach. And what you see here is that, yes, some of the same roles are there, but they're much better coordinated. For example, alliance management comes in much earlier in terms of helping with partner assessment, governance terms in terms of negotiation, launching and managing after a while, and even the legal team itself is more unified in the sense that it's the same lawyer who is both drafting, briefing, and then managing the deal. And so this kind of integration leads to a much smoother and a better way to kind of cross the bridges that we have between these disciplines, which I said from the beginning, I think is one of the problems we have. It took a lot of doing. It took a lot of understanding each other, creating a common language, having, of course, organizational structures that created incentives for this kind of job, and the results are dramatic. The results, this is a more generalized slide based on this company as well as others, but the results is what you might call future proofing. Because remember, what we're doing here is creating a deal that can live over time. And if we create a deal that is sort of isolated from what the management life of it is, then it's not going to survive. And so the future-proofing, more collaboration is more robust over the future. The vision is more robust. And when we make decisions, they're faster, they're more flexible, and therefore outcomes, even launch cycles become quicker. And certainly results also become quicker. We have a deal structure which is no longer a template that's just kind of copied from one company, one alliance to the other, but it is basically you know, customized to the incentives and the interests of each party. And importantly, there are issues that might come up during negotiation that may not make it through the contract itself, but that they're there. And because the alliance management function is involved early on, it sees these issues. And it can then kind of manage them, even though they're part, if you will, of the open-ended, incomplete part of the contract. They were not all set on paper. And what that leads to is a greater flexibility, greater adjustment, and less need for what you might call hard renegotiation. There's always a reinvention, I think, of the relationship as new events happen. But the actual renegotiation doesn't happen as often. When it does happen, we now know much more about each other, and a fast and fair response is much more likely than otherwise.